This is utterly unacceptable, Aleliana. We have lost millions because of your carelessness. Several of my coworkers recoiled when Dr. Malcolm Whitner's words echoed off the white, impersonal conference room walls. I felt the weight of 24 sets of eyes staring at me as I sat still in my chair. My public execution had become the quarterly staff meeting. My name is Aliana Voss, and I was abruptly fired from Novomemed Research Institute in Toledo, Ohio, after 15 years of devoted employment. The National Institutes of Health Grant Committee has cited significant irregularities in compliance documentation as their reason for rescinding our funding, Malcolm continued, his thin lips barely containing his rage. At 54 years old, I had dedicated my entire professional life to ensuring our lab maintained impeccable standards, every protocol followed to the letter, every compliance check performed with meticulous attention to detail, and every new staff member trained with patience and precision. $8.4 million disappeared. He struck the gleaming conference table with his fist. I wanted to protect myself. Before they could reach my lips, the words that had formed in my throat died. Finding the truth wasn't the goal here. Finding a scapegoat was the goal here. Since our lab was bought by Meditech Solutions 6 months ago, the warning flags had been mounting. Quality was suddenly subordinated to quantity. Data integrity was subordinated to deadlines. Additionally, the new generation of researchers that corporate brought in appeared to follow different guidelines than the rest of us. Malcolm declared clinically detached, Aliana Voss is no longer with the company due to these compliance failures tied to our recent grant loss. Her office will be cleared by end of day. I got up silently, smoothed my navy blue jacket, which I had worn on my first day at Novomemed, and left. Whispers broke up behind me as my footsteps reverberated down the corridor toward my office. As I passed the open lab, I noticed Dr. Erin Glass, one of Mediteca's top recruits. Her face flushed a little, and she hastily averted her gaze. What I had assumed for weeks, but couldn't verify, was verified by that little reaction. That is, until now. I had documented everything in accordance with policy, even the stuff they clearly didn't expect I would notice. I didn't limit my efforts to the official systems. I maintained parallel records of my own. I kept a confidential journal of every departure from conventional practice that I had seen since the merger, whether it was due to professional paranoia or common sense. The moment has come to use those records. I had seen other bright researchers come and go over the years. The pressure of publishing deadlines caused some to collapse. Some were tempted by the promise of revolutionary outcomes and used shortcuts to attain them. But I had always been the constant. The guardian of integrity in our lab, the one who ensured our science remained beyond reproach. I began at Novomemed when it was still a small, independent research facility specializing in autoimmune disorders. Back then, we celebrated each small discovery with genuine excitement. Our founder, Dr. Ella Novak, insisted that good science couldn't be rushed. Patience produces precision, she would say, adjusting her spectacles as she reviewed our findings. When Dr. Novak retired 5 years ago, things began to change. The new leadership was more focused on securing grants and patents than on methodical research. Then came the merger with Meditech Solutions, a corporate behemoth with deep pockets and shallow scientific principles. I cleared my desk methodically, placing 15 years of accomplishments into a cardboard box. Photographs of lab teams long since dispersed. Awards for excellence in laboratory management. The handwritten note from Dr. Novak thanking me for my unwavering dedication to the truth. Aliana, do you need any help? I looked up to see Thomas Reynolds, a young lab technician I had trained 3 years ago. His expression was a mixture of concern and discomfort. Thank you, Thomas, but I'm almost finished. I offered him a reassuring smile. Just make sure you keep detailed records of everything you do, especially when it involves the chemical storage logs. His eyes widened slightly. Is that what this is about? The chemical logs. Among other things, I replied carefully. Just protect yourself, Thomas. And remember what I taught you about protocol documentation. After he left, I unlocked my bottom drawer and removed a plain black notebook, my personal ledger. Inside were dates, times, and observations that contradicted the official records, particularly those concerning Dr. Glass's accelerated trials and the suspicious amendments to chemical storage documentation. I slipped the notebook into my bag and took one last look around the office that had been my professional home for a decade and a half. The potted aloe plant by the window. The periodic table poster with my handwritten notes in the margins. The view of the parking lot where I had watched the seasons change through countless late nights and early mornings. At the door, I turned out the light and whispered a quiet goodbye to the place that had defined so much of who I was, or rather, who I had been. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the contents of my personal ledger spread before me like evidence at a crime scene. Pages of notes, screenshots, printed and dated copies of emails that contradicted official records. A timeline emerged, showing precisely when the integrity of our research began to falter. It started 3 months ago when Dr. Glass initiated a new trial protocol for an experimental arthritis treatment. According to standard procedure, certain chemicals required specialized containment and could only be used in specific quantities over controlled time periods. But the official log showed impossibly short intervals between usage, a clear violation of safety protocols. When I questioned this, I was told by Malcolm that Dr. Glass had approval for an accelerated timeline. No further explanation was offered. Then came the missing data points in our trial results, gaps that were conveniently filled later with numbers that looked too perfect. When I raised concerns about statistical anomalies, I was reminded that Meditech has different analytical standards and that I should focus on operations, not analysis. The final piece clicked when I pulled up my security access logs. On 3 separate occasions, my credentials had been used to approve documentation changes during hours I wasn't even in the building. Someone had used my authorization to validate modifications to critical compliance documents now being used to blame me for the lost grant. My hands trembled as anger and betrayal washed over me. For 15 years, I had maintained an unblemished record. I had trained dozens of scientists in proper laboratory procedure. I had been the backbone of Novomeme's reputation for excellence. And they had discarded me without a second thought. My phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas. Everyone's in shock. They're already interviewing replacements for you. Glass seems nervous. Good, I thought. She should be nervous. I took a deep breath and opened my laptop. With methodical precision, I began organizing the evidence. First, a detailed letter to the Institutional Ethics Board outlining the falsified data and naming those responsible. Then, a comprehensive report for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, complete with time-stamped screenshots showing the chemical storage violations. As I worked, a sense of calm replaced my initial anger. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. It was about ensuring that scientific integrity wasn't sacrificed on the altar of corporate profits. By midnight, both documents were complete, ready to be sent the following morning. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet Toledo street. Tomorrow would change everything. Not just for me, but for Novameme and Meditech as well. Before heading to bed, I laid out my clothes for the morning, the same navy blue blazer I'd worn on my first day, and again on what they thought was my last. But I would have one final visit to make. One final duty to perform. As the guardian of truth, I had always strived to be. Morning light filtered through my kitchen blinds as I sipped coffee and reviewed my documents one last time. Each allegation was backed by evidence. Each claim could be independently verified. I had been meticulous. It was who I was, after all. I sent both emails within minutes of each other, first to the ethics board, then to OSHA. The weight that lifted from my shoulders was immediate and profound. Whatever happened next, the truth was out. My phone rang almost immediately. The caller ID showed Novameme. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call, Malcolm's personal number. I silenced that too. I didn't need to hear their excuses or threats. The evidence would speak for itself. I dressed carefully, sliding my arms into the sleeves of my blazer with deliberate movements. In my bag, I placed a sealed envelope containing printed copies of everything I had sent electronically. Then I drove to the laboratory one last time. The receptionist looked startled. When I walked in, "Miss Voss," we were told. "I'm just dropping something off, Diane," I said with a calm smile, handing her the sealed envelope. "Please ensure this reaches the board of directors. It's important." As I turned to leave, I saw Dr. Glass hurrying down the hallway toward me, her face tight with concern. "Aliana, wait," she called out. I paused, allowing her to catch up. Close, I could see the dark circles under her eyes, the strain etched into her features. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. "Privately." "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Dr. Glass," I replied evenly. "Please," she insisted, glancing nervously toward Malcolm's office. "What happened yesterday, it wasn't right." I tried to speak up, but you chose to remain silent, I finished for her. "Just as you chose to falsify those chemical storage logs. Just as you chose to use my credentials to approve documentation I never saw." Her face paled. "How did you?" 15 years, Dr. Glass. 15 years of watching people come and go. 15 years of knowing every system, every protocol, every audit trail in this laboratory. I kept my voice level. Professional. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" "It was Malcolm," she whispered, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. "He said we needed those results fast-tracked for the quarterly report to MedTechs. He said you were being difficult, slowing everything down with unnecessary checks. Those unnecessary checks are what keep our research valid and our lab safe," I replied. "But it doesn't matter now. The truth is already on its way to those who need to see it." The color drained from her face. "What have you done?" "My job," I answered simply. "The one I've always done, whether anyone appreciated it or not." I walked out of Novomemed for the final time, my head held high. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. By 2 o'clock, local news outlets were reporting that OSHA investigators had arrived at Novomemed Research Institute for an unscheduled, comprehensive inspection. By 4 o'clock, I received an email from someone I hadn't heard from in years, Dr. Ella Novak herself. "Eliana," it read. "I've been contacted by the ethics board regarding your report. I always knew you were the moral compass of my laboratory. Would you be willing to meet and discuss this further? There may be more that needs to be brought to light." I sat back in my chair, a small smile forming. Dr. Novak had been retired for years, but her name still carried significant weight in the scientific community. If she was getting involved, this was about to become much bigger than Malcolm or MedTechs had anticipated. 2 days later, I sat across from Dr. Elaine Novak at her modest home in the historic district of Toledo. At 78, she still possessed the sharp, analytical mind that had built Novomemed from nothing. Her living room was lined with books and academic journals, and family photos competed for space with framed scientific awards. "They've suspended all research activities pending investigation," she informed me, pouring tea into delicate cups. "OSHA found exactly what you said they would: critical violations in chemical storage and handling. The ethics board is conducting their own inquiry into the data falsification." I nodded, warming my hands on the teacup. "And Dr. Glass?" "Placed on administrative leave. She's cooperating with investigators." Dr. Novak studied me carefully. "But there's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't included in your reports." I hesitated. Dr. Novak had always been perceptive. "The grant wasn't rescinded because of compliance issues," I admitted. "At least, not the ones they blamed me for." Dr. Novak's eyebrows rose. "Go on." 3 weeks ago, I discovered discrepancies in the preliminary trial data that Dr. Glass submitted for the NIH grant. The patient improvement rates were statistically improbable, too consistent, too perfect. When I checked the raw data against what was reported, I found alterations. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the coffee table. The NIH didn't reject our grant because of administrative compliance issues. They rejected it because someone on their review committee spotted the same statistical anomalies I did. Dr. Novak opened the folder, her expression growing grave as she reviewed the contents. And Malcolm knew this? He had to. I sent him a detailed analysis 2 days before the grant was officially declined. I took a sip of tea. When the rejection came through, he needed a scapegoat. That wasn't Dr. Glass, she was his star researcher, his direct link to Meditex's approval. So he sacrificed you instead. Dr. Novak closed the folder with a decisive snap. After 15 years of exemplary service. Corporate science, I said with a wry smile. Quite different from how we used to do things. Indeed. She set the folder aside and fixed me with an intense gaze. Aliana, I'm assembling an independent review committee. Several colleagues from my days at the university have agreed to help. With your documentation and testimony, we can ensure that appropriate action is taken. Just then, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. I glanced at it and felt a jolt of surprise. It's from the National Institutes of Health Office of Research Integrity, I said, scanning the message. They're requesting a formal interview regarding the grant application and subsequent events at Novomed. Dr. Novak nodded sagely. The dominoes are falling. Once one oversight body gets involved, others typically follow. She leaned forward. Aliana, I want you to know something. What you've done, standing up for scientific integrity at great personal cost, is the very essence of what Novomed was founded upon. I'm deeply sorry that the institution I built failed you so profoundly. Her words touched me more than I expected. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt tears threatening. Thank you, I managed, composing myself. That means a great deal coming from you. As I drove home from Dr. Novak's house, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. Miss Voss, this is William Harrington from the University of Michigan Medical Research Division. Dr. Novak suggested I call you. We're looking for someone with your expertise to oversee laboratory compliance and ethics training for our staff. Would you be interested in discussing the position? A sense of vindication washed over me. This wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing. It was about finding my place in the scientific community again, somewhere my values would be respected. The University of Michigan interview went remarkably well. As I discussed my experience and philosophy regarding laboratory ethics, I could see the respect in the committee members' eyes. They weren't looking at me as a whistleblower or a troublemaker. They saw a professional with unwavering standards and the courage to uphold them. Your recommendation from Dr. Novak carries significant weight, said Dr. Harrington as he walked me out, but your handling of the Novomed situation demonstrates exactly the kind of ethical leadership we need. I left with a formal job offer, Director of Research Integrity and Compliance Training. The position would allow me to develop protocols and train researchers across multiple departments, ensuring that scientific ethics remained paramount throughout the university's research programs. Meanwhile, the situation at Novomed continued to unravel. Local news outlets reported that OSHA had issued citations for 27 violations, including several classified as serious. The resulting fines exceeded $300,000, but the damage to Novomed's reputation was far more costly. Dr. Glass had apparently broken under questioning, admitting to falsifying data at Malcolm's direction. She provided investigators with emails and recorded conversations that corroborated my evidence and extended the trail of deception further up the corporate ladder to Meditex's executives. 1 week after my visit to Dr. Novak, I received a call from an unexpected source, the board chairman of Novomed. Miss Voss, this is Harold Winthrop, came the grave voice. I wonder if you might be willing to meet with the board. We're conducting an internal investigation parallel to the regulatory inquiries, and your insights would be invaluable. My first instinct was to refuse. They had allowed me to be publicly humiliated and dismissed without due process. But then I considered Dr. Novak's ongoing efforts to salvage the research institution she had built. "I'll meet with you," I agreed, but only with my legal representative present. 2 days later, I sat in the boardroom where, just weeks earlier, I had been publicly dismissed. Now the power dynamic was entirely different. The board members looked tired and worried. Malcolm's chair was conspicuously empty. "Where is Dr. Whitner?" I asked as the meeting began. Harold Winthrop cleared his throat. "Dr. Whitner has been terminated, effective immediately. We've also severed several key relationships with Meditech Solutions and are in the process of restructuring our leadership." I nodded, maintaining a neutral expression despite the satisfaction I felt. "Ms. Voss," Winthrop continued, "we owe you a profound apology. The events that led to your dismissal were not only unjust, but potentially criminal. The board has authorized me to offer you full reinstatement with a substantial compensation package for damages to your reputation and career." My attorney and I exchanged glances. We had anticipated this. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I've accepted a position elsewhere. However, I would be willing to consult during your transition period to help restore proper protocols and procedures." The relief on their faces was palpable. They needed someone who understood the systems, someone who could help rebuild the laboratory's shattered credibility. We negotiated terms that included a public apology and retraction of all allegations against me. As we left the meeting, my attorney smiled. "That went even better than expected." "They're desperate," I replied. "The NIH has suspended all their current grants pending review. Without proper certification and compliance, they'll lose everything." That evening, I received a text message from Tomas. "They announced everything at an all-staff meeting today. Malcolm's gone. Glass is gone. And they said, you were right all along." Several people applauded. "Wish you could have seen it." I smiled at the message, but didn't reply immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting a comprehensive transition plan for Novamimed, my final contribution to the laboratory I had served faithfully for 15 years. Sometimes, I reflected, the most powerful form of redemption isn't about getting even. It's about helping rebuild what was broken, but on better foundations. The congressional hearing wasn't something I had anticipated when I first sent those emails to the Ethics Board and OSHA. Yet here I was, 6 months later, seated before the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, preparing to testify about research integrity in privately funded laboratories. Malcolm and 3 Meditech executives sat at a separate table, their faces grim. They had already faced federal charges for fraud relating to grant applications. Now they faced public scrutiny for the culture of deception they had fostered. "Ms. Voss," began Congresswoman Diaz, leading the questioning, "could you describe the events that led to your identification of these compliance violations?" For the next hour, I detailed everything: the pressure to produce results after the MedTech's acquisition, the systematic dismantling of safety protocols, the falsification of data, and the attempt to use me as a scapegoat when the deception was discovered. "And in your professional opinion," asked another committee member, "how prevalent are these practices in the industry?" "More common than we'd like to admit," I answered honestly. The pressure to secure funding and produce marketable results can override scientific integrity. That's why we need stronger whistleblower protections and more rigorous oversight. My testimony was broadcast on national news. Clips of my calm, detailed explanations contrasted sharply with Malcolm's defensive responses and the Meditech executives' evasions. Public opinion quickly solidified in favor of increased regulation for private research facilities. Dr. Novak was waiting for me as I left the witness stand. "You have done more than just expose the wrongdoing of one lab," she muttered, squeezing my hand. "You started a national dialogue on the ethics of science." Reporters jostled for remarks as we left the hearing chamber. Across the hall, Malcolm was observing me with a defeated and angry look on his face. Before he turned away, our eyes briefly locked. His career, his reputation, and soon his freedom were all gone. I had received vindication, which was considerably more significant. I stood at a stage in the University of Michigan's largest lecture hall, speaking to a crowded crowd of students, professors, and visiting researchers a year after I was fired from Novamind. My presentation's subject was ethical guardianship, preserving the honesty of scientific research. The pressures you will face in your careers are real, I informed them. Requirements for publications, business interests, and funding limitations. However, the instant you violate scientific integrity, you cease to be a scientist and transform into something completely different, something that is considerably less useful to mankind. I created a thorough training curriculum from my job at the university, and research institutes all throughout the nation are now using it. My encounter had been turned into a warning story with real-world implications. As the audience dispersed following the talk, I saw a familiar face, my old lab technician, Thomas Reynolds, coming up. "Dr. Voss," he said, grinning broadly. That was inspiring. "It's just Professor now," I gently corrected him. "How are things at Novamind?" "Completely different," was his response. "All of the procedures you created have been put into place by the new leadership group. Even if we're smaller now, the work seems genuine once again." We discussed the modifications. Novamind was still alive, but smaller and less extensive. Meditech had settled and paid fines totaling hundreds of millions. Malcolm had been sentenced to federal prison for fraud, along with 2 Meditech executives. Regarding Dr. Glass, her scientific career was essentially finished, but she had escaped imprisonment by completely working with investigators. Tomas said, "I've been offered a research position here at the university," with hesitation. "I was hoping you might serve as my advisor." I grinned as I thought of the young man who had supported me while others had abandoned me. "I'd be honored, Thomas." I got an email notification from a scientific journal later that night. "The publishing of my paper on research ethics reform has been approved." This system was evolving, although slowly. I had also done my share.